As we mentioned, the prospect of decertification of the union is reared its head again this week. And right now on SI.com, legal analyst Michael McCann provides an in-depth explanation of what decertification means and its ramifications on the lockout. Michael is with us now from New York. And Mike, in simplest terms, what does it mean when a union, any union, decertifies itself?
Sure, Matt. Decertification means that the union no longer represents the members of the union, and players at that point become independent employees. They then are able to bring antitrust litigation challenging rules that owners or management have put in place and that were previously collectively bargained. So it gives players the ability to file antitrust lawsuit, but it also means that players are no longer represented by the union and they no longer have the protections that the union provides.
Okay, and I want to get to the antitrust implications, the potential for the lawsuits, because it's all interrelated. But in terms of the timeline, what is the process to decertify? How quickly can it be done?
Matt, it can be done fairly quickly, but it requires support ultimately for most NBA players. And specifically, 30% of NBA players have to vote to have a vote on decertification. If 30% of players agree that they'll at least vote on decertification, then at that point they'll have a discussion in all likelihood and weigh the pros and cons. And then a separate vote requiring a simple majority of NBA players would be needed. And if that vote goes forward, then the National Labor Relations Board would have to review the process and ultimately could issue an order that would decertify the Players Association.
And how quickly would the union or the non-union at that point expect that to take place, the NLRB's part in it?
Well, normally it would take weeks or months, but it's possible that the players could try to accelerate the process. But keep in mind, even if they go that route, it's not something that they can reverse easily. And that's, I think, weighing in on their minds, that if they go the route of decertification, it isn't as if they can recertify overnight. And it would mean that, in all likelihood, the lockout would continue because the NBA needs some type of entity to bargain with. If there's no union, then the NBA doesn't have a group with which they can bargain.
Now, the NBA players saw NFL players take this tack, decertification, over the summer with some mixed results. Ultimately, they got a deal, and it seemed to speed up the pace of negotiations. So as NBA players look at this now, at this relatively late date, already missing regular season games, what are the pros and cons as they see it?
So, Matt, I think the pros for NBA players for decertification is that it would allow them to bring the greatest weapon they have, which is federal antitrust law, which currently isn't on the table, but which would go on the table if they decertify. And they would file a massive class action lawsuit against the league, arguing that many rules, including, for instance, the draft, where competing NBA teams join hands and say, well, we're going to select players and only those players can only bargain with one team, as in violation of federal antitrust law. That's the real threat. And it would encourage the owners, at least some players would think, to get back and offering more concessions for a new CBA. The downside, though, is that it could lead to factions. It could lead to disorganization. It could lead to uncertainty among NBA owners as to who they should be talking with. And even if there's a litigation, the litigation itself isn't collective bargaining. So they would still have to recertify. It could be a long process where there's uncertainty at the end of the table. And this is something, of course, that NBA players have never done, so they don't have a track record for doing it either.
Yeah, rough guess, how long of a process, as you just said, would this be from beginning to end?
It would likely be months, Matt, in my view, in terms of decertification would mean I think decertification would signal, in all likelihood, the NBA would be poised to cancel the season.
Well, this week a judge
they're going to run out of time.
Right, absolutely. This week a judge heard oral arguments in a lawsuit filed by the league, designed, it seems, in part to make decertification less attractive to league players. One of the league's arguments is that if the players decertify, all existing contracts should be void. How solid an argument is that legally?
Well, Matt, it's an interesting argument because the NBA has noted that the uniform player contract is located in the CBA. Well, with the CBA expired and with the parties no longer bargaining post-decertification, then what's to say that any player contract is valid? And the league will argue that all contracts would be voidable and teams could get out of financial obligations that they have. Now, the players are going to say, well, wait a second, that's creative, but there's no precedent for that. and no court should issue such an order. I think in this situation, a judge is likely to say, let's hold off, let's see if the parties keep talking. But again, once they go the route of decertification, then it's a more aggressive mentality, and I think a judge is more likely to take action in that situation.
As the players consider the option, what can they learn from 1995 when a group of players then were pushing for decertification?
That's right, Matt. Back in 1995, Michael Jordan, Patrick Ewing, along with super agent David Falk, thought no deal was being reached that they found acceptable between the players and owners, so they thought, let's go the decertification route. And they were able to get a vote on decertification, but ultimately it failed. Most players were uncomfortable with that proposition, and it was rejected by about 2/3 of the vote. Maybe we'll see something like that happen here, where there's a vote on decertification, but most players say, you know what, I don't want to go down that road. I don't want to lose an entire season or maybe more. So let's strike a deal that at the end of the day isn't great, but gets games back being played again and gets paychecks being paid again as well.
All right, Michael, thank you so much again for the explanation. Michael McCann with the complexities of the legal process should players choose decertification. And again, you get all the details on this you could possibly hope for in his article on SI.com.
Thanks, Matt.
All right, so here's what's gone away at this point in training camp. The remainder of the preseason, first 2 weeks of the regular season canceled back on October 10th. And as you know, no games through the end of November. That happened just last week, and still waiting for other shoes to drop potentially. As you hear about the talk of decertification, what goes through your mind? How viable an option is it in terms of the player support that they may have?
You know, I think you're right, Matt. You always hear decertification, but I think when you start talking about a process of time, I think right now you look at it, even if you go through this decertification, you got to get 30% of the players to vote on, to have a vote, and then you got to get the majority. When you start talking about time, I think you look at it, it's going to take months or weeks at least. And then when you start talking about weeks, I mean, I think when you look at the deadline, January 6th was the last time we agreed on the deal in 1998, 99, and then it was 50 games. So if you start talking about getting close to that date, you're talking about either missing a season or having a very, very shortened season. I don't think you can do less than 50 games.
Most of the experts out there, including Michael, seem to agree that if the players were to seriously pursue decertification of the union, the season goes away.
Yes.
Because of the legal process.
I totally agree. And I think also if the union wanted to do this, I thought they should have made that decision a little bit earlier, maybe a month or two ago.
That's reportedly when the agents were pushing for it back in the summertime.